to the first of my 2 videos on the recently released Final Fantasy XV. Yes, there's only going to be 2 videos. This one is going to be in regards to the gameplay as a whole, while the second one is going to be in regards to primarily the story of the game. Some of you may be wondering after all these years where the rest of the Final Fantasy XIII stuff is, and well, it's scattered, but will happen one day. Now, Final Fantasy XV is the most recently released game, and I spent over 100 hours in it, and therefore I think it only prudent to have this discussion with you about said game. For starters, what can I say about the game's development that you haven't already heard 100 times over from a dozen other places? Some of what I say may sound familiar if you've watched other reviews already. We all know that the game was conceptualized over 10 years ago as Final Fantasy Versus 13, had a rocky development under the direction of Tetsuya Nomura, and in the middle of all this development, the name of the game was changed, the engine in which the game was built was changed, the system of release was changed, and even Tetsuya Nomura was swapped out as director for Hajime Tabata, a relatively new face to the Final Fantasy franchise. And I have to admit, every single last little thing I heard about the development of the game horrified me. I never liked Final Fantasy XIII to begin with, so having any ties to 13 had already turned me off. I've liked Tetsuya Nomura as a character designer many years ago, though not always as much recently. I liked his work on monsters and battle images, but I never thought he was an especially competent director. For that reason, I feel as though if 15 had remained what it was looking to be as Versus 13 and had remained under Nomura's control, I would have absolutely hated the result. I know Nomura has his fans, but I just don't feel like he's a competent storyteller. But I was just as worried about the guy coming in to take his place, who hadn't played the mainline Final Fantasy games before or worked on them, who said he was interested in making a Final Fantasy out of the American Civil War, who had to look up what a Moogle was at the tail end of development, and was still trying to work out how you could possibly put an airship into the game only a few months before 15's release. But one thing I couldn't deny was that he was trying, and at every turn, he was asking Final Fantasy fans what it is they wanted to ultimately see in the finished product of the game so that fans could have the ultimate, best possible experience. It became clear, especially after Tabata became the director, that Final Fantasy XV was going to need support and success in the West, because Final Fantasy XIII was so very critically polarizing, especially from longtime Final Fantasy fans in the West who had criticized its story and linear gameplay. Several events took place in New York or Los Angeles to hype the game, nearly overhyping it, when most previous Final Fantasy events previously took place in Tokyo. For as much as they were bragging about open-world gameplay and being able to interact with everyone and everything, basically everything Final Fantasy XIII didn't do, you could see they were hoping to grab the attention of those in the West who prefer the kind of gameplay found in The Elder Scrolls, Fallout, or The Witcher. It's somewhat a good position for Square-Enix to be in. Both good and bad, really. Bad because they're likely scrambling in their offices to get everything right and out in a timely fashion, but good because it means they realize how badly they've lost the trust of many players and need to do everything in their power to earn their trust back. So even though Hajime Tabata was a relative noob to the face of the Final Fantasy franchise, he may have been just the right person to put in the position. So enough with the backstory. On November 29th, 2016, I began my first foray into the world of Final Fantasy XV. We play as Noctis, Prince of Lucis, who has been sent by his father, King Regis, to meet his suddenly assigned fiancée, Lady Lunafreya, halfway across the world. They're meant to be married as part of a peace treaty between their two countries, and really this might have been a happy event, seeing as how Noct and Luna were friends as children. But things go terribly wrong early in the game as Noct and his friends and guardians, Gladiolus, Prompto, and Ignis all learn that their home city of Insomnia and the king has fallen, as the whole peace treaty was a trick so that the Empire could steal the world's only remaining crystal, which is supposed to have all kinds of powers. Now there may be no wedding after all, and Noct and friends must journey far to protect the citizens not only of their country, but the whole planet of Eos by reobtaining his country's stolen crystal and claiming his birthright as the new king of Lucis. At the core, it's a back-to-basics fantasy story that isn't too hard to understand. It's just the meat of the story itself that begins to get a little murky. And this is due to most of the story being spread out across other media aside from the game, or simply not being there at all. This, sadly, was one of my largest problems with Final Fantasy XIII. Granted, 13's story, even if you read all the data logs and understood everything that was going on, was pretty garbage anyway, in personal opinion, but the fact that I had to read data logs in order to get the story was pretty unacceptable. I'm glad it was all there, but a video game is a visual storytelling medium. You need to show me why I care, not tell me why I care. In that sense, Final Fantasy XV is guilty of the same thing. Some of the story can be found in that Kingsglaive movie, that Brotherhood anime series, this prologue audio drama and novella, and that King's Tale game that you only get to play if you pre-ordered your game from GameStop. But even then, most of the rest of the story is told off-screen, with characters hearing about certain events through newspapers, over the radio, or sometimes in sheets of paper just lying on the ground that you have to be careful not to accidentally step over or you might miss it. Sometimes, somebody will tell me something about a character that I know should make me feel moved, but because I didn't spend time on screen with them or having them show me their problems somehow, I felt drastically less emotionally stirred than I know I could have been. It saddens me because I can see the bare bones of a story that I know could have been good, but because not enough time or attention was paid to this aspect of the game, it's sadly the weakest area of the game, and thus will require an entirely separate video for those of you who are okay with seeing spoilers. That having been said, even at its worst, Final Fantasy XV still manages to surpass everything about Final Fantasy XIII, although that really wasn't hard. I just wish I cared about what was happening to these people a little more and not about their shameless product placement.
You know something? Going through all that trouble to make our own custom cup, it's made me appreciate cup noodles even more.
Perhaps we truly can't improve upon perfection.
However, I would like to compare our four main characters to the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles specifically out of the 2014 film. Even when the rest of the movie made me wish I wasn't there, the relationship between the four brothers was easily the most relatable part of that film. That's exactly how I feel about Noct, Gladio, Ignis, and Prompto. Their interaction with one another did in fact make me feel like they knew each other pretty well, and I cared about the things that happened on screen between all of them. They were easily the best part of the story, even when, truth be told, there wasn't much story happening on screen. Also, even if I sometimes have to put up with some cringy North American localization anachronisms.
But the Archean caught it.
And he's still there, holding the thing up.
Guess he never misses leg day. What, you mad, bro?
Get her done.
As far as gameplay is concerned, a large hunk of that gameplay has entirely removed itself from that of Final Fantasy XIII, and that's exactly the direction the game franchise needed to go in. The main continent of the planet Eos, whatever, they never pronounce it out loud, is huge and massively explorable. You see that volcano? You can climb it! This hole in the mountain? It's deeper than you might guess. Almost anywhere that's grayed off on the map is someplace you haven't been but could go if you wanted to. You won't see hallways until you get to specific dungeons or, sadly, a certain point as you close into the end of the game. But, frankly, how else are you going to tell a linear story if you don't force your characters to go into a specific spot before that point? Anyway, you can talk to tons of people, overhear conversations, and actually buy stuff from shops. What a novel idea! I feel like I shouldn't be giving Final Fantasy a pass for doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing, but I'm just glad that they remembered that in previous games they had made that mistake. Furthermore, you can pick up a plethora of hunts to kill monsters, unlock harder hunts, and earn gil, which by the way is one of the only ways you'll earn gil throughout the game. Enemies don't drop money, which is more realistic that way, but can also be somewhat frustrating if you're trying to stay on top of healing items. But doing side quests, which are separate from hunts, where you help people around the world do menial things like catch frogs or take photographs, will also sometimes reap decent rewards and makes the world feel a little more full. The battle system in and of itself looks messy from a distance, but is pretty simple to execute. Sadly, you'll only ever directly control Noctis, but at least the battle system is fun enough. Holding down circle will allow you to attack. Holding down square will allow you to dodge until you run out of mana. A green bar will fill up on the left-hand side of your screen, allowing you to give the other party members a chance to do cool attacks occasionally. Also, as the Prince of Lucis, Noctis has the special power to warp from place to place during battle. Having him warp to a faraway place regains his MP, and warping from that faraway place back to the enemy will deal additional damage. There's magic in the game, but only in the varieties of fire, lightning, and ice. By combining magic that you've drawn from different locations around the world, much in the same vein as the draw system in Final Fantasy VIII, you can also combine your magics with other items that you happen to be carrying with you. So you may end up with an ice spell that also happens to heal. But otherwise, there's really no other variety of magics, not even simple white magics like Cure. As a result, I personally sort of just ended up blunt forcing my way through the majority of the game. With enough healing items like high potions and elixirs, you can pretty much beat anything, even a level 99 Adamantis when you're only level 68! I mean, hell, it took me a couple hours, but I did it. By that token, levels in the game almost don't matter. It's just a matter of how long you want fights to take and how many items you're willing to blow through. It was for that reason that I decided I wanted to take on as many hunts and side quests as the game would allow me to before I continued the story. While I'd seen most other reviews stating that you could blow through the story of the game in less than 20 hours, maybe even less than 15 hours, I ended up not beating the story of the game until over 80 hours with it, getting me to level 73. By that point, I was seriously over-leveled for the main story, and for the most part, it was exceptionally simple to blow through. In fact, it may have been one of the easiest Final Fantasy games I've ever played. And mind you, there's two settings, easy and normal, and I was playing on normal. Now at a certain point, you'll be able to use summons in the game. Typically in other Final Fantasies, a summon has the possibility of just being complete overkill in a fight, or being your ace in the hole during a boss battle. This isn't actually a luxury that 15 affords you. The summons just sort of pick whatever time they feel like jumping out to help you. Sometimes they seem to come out because you're at low health or you're taking too long on a difficult enemy. Other times, it's an enemy 30 levels lower than me and it's almost dead, and Rama comes out like he's all concerned that I need his help, and I go, screw it, you didn't show up to help me kill level 99 mountain turtle. Yeah, you can have the last 20 hit points of this monster, I guess. Now the action is pretty alright, but that camera, man, it needed a little help. Most of the time, when it's out in the wide open desert, there really isn't a problem. But if you're in a forest, the camera always manages to get itself stuck behind some trees, and I just hold down my circle button and occasionally dodge and counter based on QuickTime events and hope that I'm hitting the enemy. Which, you know, luckily I usually am. But in dungeons or hallways, there's way too much crap happening. The camera does whatever it wants, sometimes it goes into the wall, and you just have no idea what's happening. I really wish they could take care of themselves better. Ignis is capable of an occasional first aid ability here and there, but it's not enough to keep the party on their feet. You can make Ignis learn how to use high potions on Noctis every time his health goes down halfway, but for one thing, you'll blow through all your potions, and for another thing, he never freaking worries about himself or anybody else. You'll spend this extra time trying to pick them back up and cure them, and half the time I feel like I'm just doing the whole battle all on my own. And I mean, sometimes I am, because there are moments in dungeons where I run up to an enemy only to turn the camera around and find that my other buddies are nowhere in sight. So, thanks bros. Travel is a really big deal in this game. The map is huge, so more than likely you'll be spending the majority of the time traveling the map by car. I knew I was going to be spending a lot of time in the regalia, so I specifically decided to make it as ugly as the game would allow me. For funsies. Now, the car requires gassing up from time to time, which costs 10 gil every time. Not a whole lot, but gil isn't very common to come by, since monsters and quests don't drop gil. Like I said, you'll have to take on hunts to get the largest bulk of your money if you want to gas up and buy weapons and stay in motels. The car travel was a fun novelty at first, but then, if you're like me and you decided you needed to do everything available to you in the game before continuing the story, you're going to be spending a lot of time going back and forth across the map. So either you're staring at your car driving down the road, or you're staring at a loading screen as you quote-unquote fast travel. Loading screens in this game are a real pain. You may as well not waste fast travel if your destination is between 1 and 2 minutes away, but even if you do choose to fast travel, that also costs 10 gil to use every time. It makes it pretty prudent to go on those hunts before you do anything else, so you at least have the gas to get everywhere. For that reason, I didn't entirely understand the reasoning behind all the reviews that said you'd be doing most of your gameplay as post-game content. It's true that you can blow through the story of the game in about 15 hours and then do all the side quests, hunts, and extra dungeons after you beat the story, but it just seems that those early reviewers were trying to get their reviews out to you as quickly as possible. The best way to experience the fullness of Final Fantasy XV is to do literally everything set out before you. Explore every inch of the map, because if nothing else, that's what the game has done right. There's so much to do that you'll have a hard time running out of quests and hunts and places to explore. I ended up spending 110 hours in the game doing literally everything there was to do before continuing the story, and I have no regrets. I think I would have been a whole lot more upset with the story of the game if I had decided to just blow straight through it. Take some time to feed a cat, take some pictures for this guy, fight a giant turtle the size of a mountain. In these aspects, Final Fantasy XV really shines and is legitimately fun to play. And with your main 4 characters for the most part feeling like real people interacting with each other, cooking, camping, fishing, and taking photos of each other, it does so much of a better job being a game than, say, Final Fantasy XIII ever did. Again, though, this wasn't hard. All they had to do was remember to throw Final Fantasy fans a bone every so often. Put the victory fanfare somewhere. Put the preludes somewhere. Put the Chocobo theme somewhere. Actually be able to interact with Chocobos. Put the Final Fantasy theme somewhere. Put classic monsters in the game. Give us an airship to pilot. It's disappointing that the game gives you a flying car, but you can only access it after the events of the main story, and so it means nothing during the real events of the game, but I mean, at least it's there. Again, here I go, just giving them a pass for doing the thing they should have done in the first place, but man, I'm just glad it was there. In that sense, I absolutely feel like this game succeeds at being a Final Fantasy, even if it's clear that production issues made the game's story suffer, and thus I unfortunately can't say that this is one of my favorite Final Fantasy stories. The game's music has been composed by Yoko Shimomura, many tracks of which were composed 10 years ago when this game was still meant to be Versus 13, as you can hear some of the tracks appearing even in the game's earliest trailers. Many may know her music from other such games as Kingdom Hearts and Parasite Eve. Some tracks are quite good and memorable, others are simply good for atmosphere, but I won't be humming them later. But I can't say I hated any of the music at all. Shimomura's interpretation of Nobuo Uematsu's classic tracks are really quite good. Rodeo de Chocobo is a fantastic interpretation of the traditional Chocobo theme. None of the older songs revisiting this game have in any way been butchered. Shimomura, I feel, is quite worthy of carrying on the Final Fantasy soundtrack's legacy, even if I love Nobuo Uematsu's stylings to pieces. there are few places where the gameplay itself really suffered. It's worth mentioning that I'm releasing this video only a little over a month after the game's release, so everything I'm saying relates to the game before major patches to fix gameplay and story elements. But prior to any patching, there's a late chapter in the story that takes you from the wide open spaces of the world down to narrow hallways that will remind you of Final Fantasy XIII for at least 2 hours. I can understand the game becoming linear in order to complete the story, but you might be turned off to it after you've spent 50 hours in an open world. Or you'll finally hit post-game and you find yourself inside Piteos Dungeon, a dungeon made of nothing but platforming, which could have been cool if your main character was built for a platforming title. You'll find him stumbling and rolling off so many platforms that you'll wonder what the point even was for entering the dungeon in the first place. I can't think of anything else in the entire game I'd rather do less, and in fact never repeat ever again, than re-entering Piteos Dungeon. And then there's controlling the flying car, the Regalia Type F at all. It handles like you have to take flight training in order to really get it right. Because if you even slightly tap something that isn't the road, your entire party dies in a great ball of flame! Woohoo! Ultimately, despite the game's glaring flaws and issues, I can't at all say that I'm sorry that I played it. It's also the only PS4 game I've ever gotten every single trophy for, and it might just be one of the Final Fantasies I've spent the most time in. I can't possibly say it's my favorite in the franchise, but it kept me coming back, wanting to complete more and more, and hoping I could see more of its expansive world. In fact, I was disappointed in the places it didn't allow me to explore, especially in areas near the end of the storyline of the game. But my hope is that things progressively get repaired more and more through free DLC as time goes on, as director Hajime Tabata has promised. These are things that should have absolutely been in the game to begin with. However, I'm glad to see that these issues are slowly being addressed at all, when the company could have chosen to just leave the game as it is now that it's released. If story is what you come to Final Fantasy for, this might not be the game for you. I'd sooner suggest that you rent or borrow the game before deciding to make a purchase. Perhaps future DLC will change this opinion, but as the game stands right now, it's not worth the purchase simply for the sake of the story. But in many other ways, in gameplay, musical cues, and classic Final Fantasy monsters and summons, the game is fun and still manages to feel like a Final Fantasy game while also appealing to people who are only just now getting into the franchise. Overall, I'd recommend giving it a try. It at least deserves that much of your time. If you've already played the game or don't mind spoilers, I hope you'll come back to visit me in my upcoming second video, which primarily discusses the story of Final Fantasy XV, which sadly doesn't nearly get as much praise as I gave in this video. Thanks for watching.